certain mushrooms that are to be found principally in the state of Oaxaca, but actually along the whole west coast of America as far north as Vancouver. The mushroom psilocybe mexicana, Haim, is the principal one so used. And likewise here again, this mushroom, which is called teocanatl, or the flesh of God, is taken for religious purposes in a sacramental way. Both of these, as I would say, have a general atmosphere about them which is rather earthy. They go extraordinarily well with the vegetative world. They bring to life one's vision of nature and water and plants and sky in an extraordinary way. On the other hand, LSD has a more, I can only call it electronic feel about it. I don't know why. But the possibility of LSD by itself is to get to about here. And all that I described as the molecular kind of consciousness. LSD is produced from wheat ergot, from, first of all, lysergic acid, which is derived from wheat ergot and then refined into a very complex molecule, a diethyl amide of lysergic acid, and the diethyl amide in particular is number 25. So it's LSD 25 is the normal correct initials for it. The peculiarity of this substance is what a lot will be done by a little. It is given in microgram doses. Now, a microgram is a millionth, isn't it? A millionth of a gram? Thousandth. And a milligram is a thousandth of a gram. A millionth of a gram. And that you can't see. Vitamin B12 is also given in micrograms. And as little as 75 or even 50 micrograms will produce the characteristic effects of LSD in most human subjects. 100 will certainly do it. I would say any dosage over 200 involves risks. And so when irresponsible experimentation involves people vying with each other as to how much they've taken, and they start to go up towards 1,000, they're being just plain stupid. I mean, who knows, like sitting around on a great drunk and betting on whether you could demolish a whole quart of whiskey in an hour. Well, what a ridiculous thing to do. I mean, that's like trying to land a jet aircraft on the freeway. It's just stupid. And so one always feels that in the use of these things that they have the same sort of dangers that high-powered things of any kind have, rifles or automobiles or planes, and therefore that the use of them should be licensed. The question is, we don't know quite how to license them because we don't know who is really qualified to decide. And this is one of the most problematic things of the whole of our technological advance. Who is to decide? Because you see, to be a qualified expert on any of these subjects, it isn't enough to be a psychiatrist alone. It isn't enough to be a psychopharmacologist, that is to say, one who specifically studies the biochemistry or the neurology of these substances. The psychiatrist should also have some knowledge of religion, of sociology, of mythology, of you might say mythology including symbols and all that sort of thing, though that should go along with it. And you see, we don't yet train a class of person who has all these disciplines at his disposal. And so every trained class of person who belongs in a particular category, minister, psychiatrist, pharmacologist, all feel at a bit of a disadvantage and therefore reluctant to assume responsibility for this kind of investigation. But you see, the trouble is one of those things you can't get out of. Somebody has got to assume responsibility for it because it's happening. All these things are being used, and nothing is going to stop their use. You can't prohibit LSD, at least you can write it down in the books that it is prohibited, and you can tell the police to stop it. But why? The police are harassed enough with enough jobs as it is. Why send them on a task considerably more difficult than looking for needles in a haystack? LSD can be disguised so as to appear like almost anything. It can be made into gum for envelopes. It can be disguised as Kleenex, or blotting paper, or peanut butter, or honey, or just anything you choose. And so it is it's so minute, it is tasteless, it has no odor. So there is no way whatsoever of concealing this. It is the perfect secret weapon. It is the perfect elixir, you know, the thing that is the mystery. And therefore it can induce fantastic paranoia. Not only, it's so funny, when you read some of the alarmist notices written about LSD from people who've never taken it, they read just as if they had taken it and had a bad trip, because they've got paranoia. They see it on all sides, everywhere, this menace creeping in the marmalade, you know, in the drinking water. You know, just drop a pound of it in the local reservoir and the whole town's turned on. So, like the general in Dr. Strangelove, who was objecting to the communist plot to put fluoride into the water and destroy our natural juices, similar personalities are terrified that there's a big communist plot of something or other to circulate LSD to undermine the youth of America and make them all peaceable so that they won't fight. Well, that's not the way to handle things. All these things are best when they're out in the open. And then when we can have no paranoia about it, no hiding things, as it is supposing a group of students who are not out for kicks, incidentally. Kicks is a way of putting down young people. It's not taking them seriously. If you want to put down the young people and say they're only out for kicks, you've no business sending them to fight wars in Vietnam, which is a very responsible undertaking. So if a group of kids in college decide that they, for serious reasons of religious or personal investigation, want to take LSD, it would be very sensible of them to ask a psychiatrist to come over and sit with them for the day. And they would each put up enough money to pay him for his time. But they're not allowed to do so. That would be illegal. It would be illegal for the psychiatrist to take part in such a thing. That's the kind of nonsense you get to. So that what happens instead is that crime takes over. And organized crime hasn't really moved into LSD yet because there have been enough enthusiastic graduate chemistry students who would manufacture it, and they're idealists, and they only want to make a relatively small amount of money on it, and they want to turn everybody on. They want to turn on the President of the United States, the President of the Russian Republic, and everybody. They want to get high on LSD so as to make them see things. And here lie the dangers. That the only way of getting LSD at the moment is on the black market. Genuine researchers cannot get it right now. Now, black market LSD is liable to be loaded with many other things, especially if it comes from the syndicate. It is apt to be spiked with heroin, so as to get you hooked. Other people mix it with amphetamines to soup up the effects. Then also the idealistic graduate student may give you a larger dose than you thought you were buying. And so it's twice what it says on the bottle. And since there is no control over the quality of manufacture, it is as bad as the state of affairs in Prohibition when people were drinking highly deleterious bathtub gin. Nobody in his senses will take black market LSD. You don't know what you're getting. So by comparison with black market LSD, these other materials are not nearly so dangerous if taken in moderation. This really isn't dangerous at all. It's just that probably if people smoked it, it would give the liquor industry a bit too much competition for comfort. So then now, each of these I've drawn a characteristic limit point where I said it will take you of itself. But then with a little push, if you've got the background and the initiative and the what have you, the training, you can take each one of them further. In fact, you can take even this one right the way through to here, and this likewise. But you see there's a corresponding effort, or whatever you want to call it, involved in each case. And you see, generally speaking, their effects are everything that I described under the terms of sensory consciousness, the sense of being time slowed down, being at one with the full physical environment, finding enormous delight and significance in what would ordinarily be called insignificant or unimportant patterns, the tones of people's voice, the fantastic vibrations of musical instruments, their different qualities of texture, and so on, is very much emphasized here, which is why this is a favorite chemical among musicians. Here, one goes into this very much, the utter fascination of the microscopic world, of texture, of the splendor of nature. I picked up, with using mescaline, a rotten log, about so long, so thick, with fungus on it. You know, that kind of shelf-like fungus that grows? And in the state of mescaline, this looked like a piece of jewelry, a great big thing made of ebony and ivory, and heaven only knows what. All of it looked as if it had been minutely carved by a man like Cellini. It looked like a superb work of art, instead of just a rotten old log. With LSD, the same initial sort of effects, but with it is apt to go, for a while, a kind of a strange sensory jazz. Walls start to breathe, to waver, ripple. Supposing you see something like, well, let's take a sea urchin's shell. You can look at it and all the nipples on it start to wiggle. Not only to your eyes, but also to your sense of touch. Meanwhile, the shell breathes in and out with the nipples wiggling on it. And you wonder now, what's the reason for that? Is this a hallucination? What's going on? You know it's obviously the effect of the chemical. But I begin to wonder about this because I try to establish why they wiggle, and I find if I hold my eyes quite still on a certain point, they stop wiggling. But if I, in the normal way, let my eyes drift hither and yon over the thing, it wiggles. So I begin to think, well, after all, my eyes are gelatinous, and my brain is a pretty gooey mass of stuff. Maybe that things seen in the eye and on the soft surface of the retina actually do wiggle a bit. Only we learn not to see that. After all, when birds walk, have you ever watched when a bird walks, its head goes like this? Now, if you do that, you get your landscape going, you see? But obviously, surely birds don't permanently live in a landscape that goes like this when they walk. In other words, they screen that out, and they make a constant. So likewise, we've learned socially that all these lines in this room are straight. See, they're not wiggly, they're made of a solid substance and they don't wiggle. Well, maybe they do in our eyes, only we've learned to ignore that. Just as we can, see, I don't have binocular vision. And so if I look at something, I should be seeing it double. But I don't, because I repress psychologically one of the eyes. I can be either. But I simply repress that information so that I see like anybody else. So these changes are rather strange. And not only do colors become intensely vivid, but sounds boom through you. And then you get to a point where you can see light in terms of sound, in terms of shape. All the senses seem to be one sense, fundamentally. A kind of fundamental sense of touch. But you touch light with your eyes, you touch sound with your ears, you touch wood with your fingers, you touch gas with your nose, and you touch taste essences with your tongue. But it's all one touch. And then, beyond that, you get into something else. When the sensory jazz wears off, the effect seems to go to deeper levels of one's mind. And I would say, for me, the most startling property of all these three chemicals, in their varying ways, is that they substitute for either or thinking and feeling both and. That is to say, they facilitate polar feeling and thinking. You see, according to Gestalt psychology, our normal attentive consciousness is captured by the figure rather than the background, by the moving rather than the stationary. Enclosed figures with clear outline against the background win your attention in such a way that you see the figure and ignore the background. If on an empty blackboard I draw this figure and say to an audience, what is it? Most people will say it is a circle, it is a ball, it is a disc. Very few people will suggest that I've drawn a hole in a wall. You see, because attention goes here. But you realize, obviously, you couldn't see the figure without any background. Now, you find you can reverse attention between figure and ground fairly easily. You see this either as a ball or as a hole in a wall, but it's difficult to see it as both. In the same way, you know that figure of two faces in profile, which are about to kiss each other. And they are a black silhouette. But the area between the profiles forms a white chalice. Now, it's very difficult to see simultaneously kissing faces and white chalice. You tend to see one or the other because the two images are incompatible. Unless perhaps you form the concept of it as a loving cup, then you may be able to see both, because what you see depends to a large extent on the concept that you're using. If, for example, you have a concept of number which goes 1, 2, 3, many, then you can never know that a table has 4 corners. You haven't got the number 4, it has many corners, because it's 1 above 3. Anything above 3 is many. So there's no difference in concept between a table with 4 corners or a table with 20. For those primitive kind of arithmeticians. So then polar thinking becomes characteristic of all of these in here, and increasingly felt that the inside goes with the outside in the same way that the back goes with the front, that you go with your circumstances. It isn't that you are pushed around by them as a puppet, but that you and your circumstances, you and your environment are all the real you. That's what you're doing. And so you experience, even though the circumstances may not be what would ordinarily be called harmonious, that is to say, pleasant circumstances, you realize that there is an unbreakable harmony between your behavior and the behavior of the external world. And so this polarity becomes very important. But it can scare the wits out of you. And this is a danger point. If you say now then, all right, if inside goes with outside, likewise good goes with bad. As I said before, you wouldn't know you were law-abiding people unless there were some criminals around to compare yourselves with. By comparison, you know that you're law-abiding. Well, now, you begin to worry if good goes with bad. Who's in charge around here? Who's to say what's right? If, after all, everything works out in the end, if anything goes. And therefore you can start to get worried. How will I know? What will I depend on in myself that I will behave in what is considered a sane way at the next moment? Will I suddenly be overcome with a passion to kill somebody? And in this way, not knowing which end is up because everything is so relative, it feels as if when you put your foot, your psychic foot, upon what you hope to be firm ground, the ground immediately collapses, and you find yourself freely falling in space. And this is terrifying. You are afloat. You are in the floating world. You are in the relative universe in which there is nothing to hang on to, because the only thing that might be hangable onto is you. In other words, suddenly, the eternal rock, the firm foundation upon which the saints of the Lord are supposed to build, the rock of ages in which you're supposed to be able to hide yourself, all that has gone. And it seems at first that there is nothing to cling to. And so the sweat can pour from you. Until you say, well, that's really the way it always was. When I was born, I was kicked off the edge of a precipice. And I've been consoling myself all this time by hugging to a big chunk of rock that fell off with me. But you know, there is no security. And if you go with it, you see, and you don't try to fight and to find something to cling to, it's all right. Then you discover that the void that you were so frightened of is the clear light, this thing. That it isn't empty in the ordinary sense of the word at all. But once you let go of your clinging, that's all you let go of. There's no you to let go of, really. All the thing to do is stop clinging, because what that does is bunch you all up. No, it's like going around like this. No? Sort of totally paranoid, clinging. What's going to happen to me? Well, come on, loosen up. You can't do anything if your hands are tied up here all the time, holding on to yourself. Or you know, you're trying to get on by pulling up your own belt and trying to lift yourself off the ground this way. You never get anywhere. But when you let go, then there's a possibility of doing something. Well, I hope that people will get some sense about these things, and that those of us who are interested in their responsible use will be able to use them responsibly, and through that be able to educate the public into a sane behavior with these things, just as we are able to some extent to educate the public to behave sensibly with automobiles and whiskey. We haven't done too good a job, but at any rate, we do make a try at it.